Michelle Lee disappeared from a hospital parking garage in broad daylight, without leaving a single trace behind. It was May 27th, 2011. Michelle was a nursing student completing her clinical rotation at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Hayward, California. She was just 6 months away from graduating. Her future was already taking shape. That afternoon, she finished her shift like she always did. Nothing about the day suggested it would end any differently. At 6:55 p.m., Michelle told her supervisor she was going to the third-floor parking garage to get something from her car. Security cameras later showed her walking toward her white Honda SUV. She slowed down, hesitated, then suddenly changed direction, walking away from her car for reasons no one could explain. 17 minutes later, her SUV exited the parking structure. By 9 p.m., hospital staff gathered the nursing students to officially wrap up the day. Michelle wasn't there. She hadn't signed out. Her coat was still in the break room. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Her instructor felt something was wrong. Security was contacted, and together they searched the parking garage where Michelle usually parked. The structure was quiet, empty, no sign of her. Then, unexpectedly, Michelle's SUV re-entered the garage and pulled up to the third floor. Her instructor saw the vehicle and called out, waving her arms, trying to get it to stop. The SUV paused, then it turned around and sped away. The instructor was certain of one thing: Michelle was not driving. The behavior made no sense. It wasn't her. Police were called immediately. By the next morning, Michelle had been missing for more than 10 hours. Friends, classmates, and coworkers flooded the police station, all saying the same thing. This wasn't like her. She wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't disappear without telling anyone. Investigators returned to the hospital parking garage. Near the spot where Michelle's SUV had been parked, they found blood on the ground. Around 9 a.m., her white Honda was located a short distance away, parked in a visitor's space near an apartment complex. The car was locked. Inside were Michelle's belongings, her bag, her laptop, her identification. But there was also something else. Another ID, one that did not belong to Michelle. It had been reported stolen days earlier. At this point, police ruled out a random incident. The evidence suggested planning. Someone had taken control of the situation, moved her car, locked it, and attempted to erase what happened. Then the messages started. As investigators towed the vehicle, Michelle's brother, Michael, received a text from her phone, "I'm okay." Shortly after, another message followed, "I'm not missing." There was an explanation about her phone malfunctioning, data being erased, and the battery dying. Friends received messages too, but every story was different. A flat tire, a sudden trip to Reno, a need to step away from social media. When her ex-boyfriend texted her, the response was chillingly simple. "Who is this?" Nothing added up. Before the investigation unfolded, before suspects and evidence, there was one undeniable truth. Michelle Lee had walked into a hospital parking garage and never walked out. And whatever happened to her in that silent space was deliberate. Before her disappearance, Michelle Lee was just like any other young woman chasing her dreams, but she carried a determination that made her stand out. Born on October 12, 1984, in San Diego, she grew up in a large, close-knit family. Her home was always bustling with cousins, laughter, and the kind of noise only a big family can create. But even in that lively environment, Michelle had learned responsibility early. When her mother, a devoted nurse, passed away, Michelle didn't let grief break her. She let it guide her. Becoming a nurse was no longer just a career choice. It was a promise to honor her mother's legacy. She faced years of setbacks, waiting 5 long years before being accepted into an accelerated nursing program designed to cram a year of intense training into just 12 months. Michelle excelled. Instructors called her cheerful, dependable, and meticulous. She took on tasks others avoided, helped classmates quietly, and asked questions that improved patient care. By May 2011, she was months away from completing the dream she had worked her entire life to achieve. That Friday, Michelle was finishing her last clinical rotation. She had plans for the weekend, a trip to Reno to see friends. At 6:55 p.m., She told her supervisor she was heading to the third-floor parking garage to grab something from her car. Security cameras would later show her approaching her white Honda SUV, pausing briefly as if to check her surroundings, and then, inexplicably, turning away from the vehicle. What happened in those 17 minutes remains one of the most chilling mysteries of the case. By 9 p.m., when staff gathered the nursing students to officially end the day, Michelle was gone. She hadn't signed out. Her coat remained in the break room. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Friends and colleagues were immediately alarmed. Something was seriously wrong. Her instructor and hospital security rushed to the garage. The space was empty. Then, in a moment that defied explanation, Michelle's SUV reappeared. It paused briefly on the third floor, then sped away. The instructor was certain Michelle was not driving. Her actions didn't match the young woman they knew. The following morning, the police began a formal investigation. Investigators realized immediately that Michelle's disappearance wasn't random. Who is this? The messages were deliberate misdirection. Whoever orchestrated Michelle's disappearance wanted to buy time, avoid suspicion, and keep the truth hidden. Search efforts intensified. Over 100 volunteers combed the area around the hospital. A private investigator joined the family and law enforcement. Hope was strong, but every lead seemed to raise more questions than answers. Investigators began looking closer at the people in Michelle's life. Anyone who knew her routines or had grievances against her became a person of interest. The puzzle was slowly forming, but the final picture remained frighteningly out of reach. Michelle Lee's promising life, filled with ambition, care, and determination, was about to collide with a darkness she could never have imagined. Investigators quickly realized Michelle Lee's disappearance wasn't random. The timing, the details, and the strange return of her SUV all suggested someone had been watching her closely. Police began questioning friends, classmates, and colleagues, anyone who knew her daily routines. One name kept appearing: Giselle Esteban. She had once been very close to Michelle, even living together in college. But something had changed. Their friendship had ended bitterly. Giselle had a past with a man named Scott Markin and their 6-year-old daughter. Michelle had known Scott casually. There had been a few dates long ago, but nothing serious. Michelle moved on, but Giselle didn't seem to let go. Threatening messages from Giselle were found on Michelle's phone. One read, "I hope you find what you're looking for in someone as disgusting as her." Another warned, "She won't pass her midterms." Police spoke with Scott. He described Giselle's behavior as erratic. She had shown up uninvited at his home, often alone, sometimes with their daughter in the car. Recordings revealed her making chilling threats about Michelle, insisting she wouldn't be a problem for much longer. Investigators turned to physical evidence. Hospital security footage showed someone using a stolen ID to access locked areas shortly before Michelle disappeared. The badge belonged to Michelle, but the person on camera was someone else, moving deliberately through classrooms and offices. Cell phone records added another layer of intrigue. Michelle's phone and this other phone were in the same area at the same time after Michelle vanished. Witnesses saw the same person enter an Apple store the next day, asking staff to unlock a phone. It was Michelle's phone. Surveillance footage showed the person leaving the store and sending confusing messages to Michelle's friends. Every piece of evidence seemed to connect: the stolen ID, the phone activity, the threatening messages. Yet no one had concrete proof of what had actually happened to Michelle. Her family and friends watched anxiously as the search continued. Volunteers combed nearby neighborhoods. Police followed every lead. Every unanswered call, every misleading text, left Michelle's loved ones desperate for answers. The investigation began to narrow focus. Someone close to Michelle had knowledge of her routines, her schedule, and the places she frequented. Every new discovery brought more questions than answers, and each step brought the chilling possibility that Michelle's disappearance had been planned. Even without knowing the full truth, one fact was undeniable. Michelle Lee's life had been violently interrupted, and the person responsible had orchestrated events with careful precision. Investigators focused on Michelle's last hours. Security cameras at the hospital captured her walking toward her car. She paused, hesitated, then walked away. What happened in those minutes was a mystery. Next, police reviewed hospital access logs. Michelle's ID badge had been used after hours to enter classrooms and offices. But the footage revealed something alarming. Someone who wasn't Michelle was moving through the building, retracing her steps, and checking her schedule. Cell phone records added more pieces to the puzzle. After Michelle disappeared, her phone pinged in the same area as another device belonging to a former friend. Witnesses even saw that person in an Apple store, claiming a phone was locked. Surveillance showed them leaving with Michelle's device. From there, texts were sent to friends, giving false stories, flat tire, trip to Reno, or a break from social media. Each message created confusion and delayed the search. Volunteers and families scoured the neighborhoods. Police tracked every camera angle, every badge swipe, and every phone ping. They were piecing together the movements of someone who clearly knew Michelle's routines. Scott, a mutual friend, shared critical information. He described prior conflict between Michelle and the former friend, including threatening messages and a recording in which a direct warning was issued against Michelle. Investigators began seeing a pattern. This person was methodical, observing Michelle and acting to control the situation. Every swipe of a badge, every text, and every camera capture showed deliberate effort to mislead. Investigators traced routes, matched phone pings to locations, and noted repeated suspicious visits near Michelle's usual places. Michelle's family continued searching, but answers were scarce. Every clue raised new questions. The focus narrowed. Someone close to her life had orchestrated these events. And then, one security camera revealed the first chilling glimpse of who had been watching Michelle all along. Police focused on Michelle's circle, searching for anyone who might know her routines. One name kept surfacing: Giselle Esteban, a former friend, someone Michelle had once trusted. Their friendship had ended badly, leaving tension that now drew investigators' attention. Giselle had a past connection to Scott Markin, a man Michelle had known casually. Michelle had moved on, but old jealousy lingered. Investigators noted this as a possible motive, but the facts still needed to emerge. Security footage became a key lead. It showed Giselle using Michelle's stolen ID badge to enter classrooms and offices after hours. She moved deliberately, retracing Michelle's schedule, observing who came and went. Every action was calculated. Phone records added another clue. Michelle's device pinged in the same area as Giselle's phone after she vanished. Witnesses saw Giselle enter an Apple store, claiming the phone belonged to her daughter, then leave with Michelle's phone. From there, Giselle sent texts to Michelle's friends, spinning confusing stories. A flat tire, a trip to Reno, needing a break. Friends were left puzzled. Michael, Michelle's brother, received messages from the phone. "I'm okay," and "I'm not missing." Each message added to the chaos, buying time for the person behind it. Investigators traced every badge swipe, every phone ping, and every camera angle. The timeline was building. They could now see who was moving through Michelle's world and when. Scott provided critical evidence. Recordings captured Giselle making threats against Michelle, warning harm would come if she didn't stay away. Investigators now had concrete signs of intent, but a breakthrough was still missing. Investigators waited, examining the evidence for anything that could tie the suspect directly to Michelle. Then it came, a strand of hair. Found inside Michelle's car, it matched Giselle. It was the first undeniable proof linking her to the disappearance. A small but explosive detail that shifted the investigation into a new, urgent phase. With this discovery, police knew they were no longer chasing shadows. Someone close to Michelle had left a trace, and now investigators had the evidence they needed to focus their next moves. The strand of hair found inside Michelle's car changed everything. For weeks, investigators had been following digital trails. Now, they had physical evidence tying a specific person to Michelle's disappearance. Police went back to the hospital. They rewatched surveillance footage frame by frame. One camera showed a familiar figure lingering near Michelle's SUV, then moving away just before the car left the garage. The timing stood out. Next came the phone data. Investigators traced Michelle's phone after she vanished. It pinged near a cafe. From that same area, texts went out to friends saying Michelle had gone to Reno. Another message claimed her tire was flat. Each text bought time. They mapped the phone's movement across the city. Every stop lined up with places connected to the same former friend. Michelle wasn't sending those messages. Someone else was. Police examined Giselle Esteban's background more closely. They uncovered a pattern: repeated arguments, escalating threats, and attempts to insert herself into Michelle's life. This wasn't a single outburst. It was sustained behavior. Search efforts expanded. Volunteers combed neighborhoods and remote areas. Officers checked traffic cameras and apartment complexes. Despite the effort, Michelle was still missing. The pressure was mounting. Then forensic teams examined Giselle's personal space. Near her front door, they found shoes with traces of Michelle's blood on the soles. Inside Michelle's SUV, they confirmed Giselle's hair. This was no longer circumstantial. Blood, hair, phone records, surveillance. Each piece placed Giselle closer to Michelle's final moments. Scott Markin provided more recordings, arguments filled with anger and threats. Investigators listened carefully, matching those words to the actions they were now uncovering. By this point, the case had shifted completely. Police were no longer asking if Michelle had been harmed. They were building a case to prove who was responsible. And then, evidence from Giselle's SUV gave investigators the break they had been waiting for, pushing the case toward an arrest. Investigators shifted their attention to Giselle's SUV. Inside, they found what they had been waiting for: Michelle's blood. Not transfer, not contamination, direct contact. They rebuilt the timeline minute by minute. The SUV's movements matched the phone pings. Each stop lined up with a misleading text sent from Michelle's phone. The pattern was unmistakable. Michelle had been inside Giselle's car after she vanished. Police brought Giselle in for questioning again. This time, there was no small talk. Investigators laid out the evidence one piece at a time: badge swipes, surveillance footage, phone data, hair, blood. Her story began to unravel. Details shifted. Timelines no longer matched. While questioning continued, search teams made a devastating discovery. Michelle's remains were found near Pleasant Valley Road, a remote, isolated area. Hidden, deliberate, chosen to avoid discovery. The autopsy removed all doubt. Cause of death: strangulation. This was not an accident. Michelle had been killed. The investigation crossed its final line. Giselle Esteban was arrested and charged with murder. The former friend, once referenced only through evidence, was now formally named. Prosecutors outlined the sequence clearly: surveillance, impersonation, misdirection, control. The digital trail meant to buy time became the very thing that exposed her. In court, recordings from Scott Markin were played. The threats no longer sounded emotional. They sounded precise, predictive, like warnings that came too late. Michelle's family and friends listened as the final picture took shape. The unanswered calls, the false messages, the routine stolen and reused against her. Each detail traced the final days of her life. The community was shaken, not because the clues were absent, but because they had been hidden in plain sight. And as Giselle awaited trial, one question refused to fade: how long had Michelle been watched before she ever realized she was in danger? The trial forced jurors to retrace Michelle's final days exactly as investigators had, one step at a time. Prosecutors didn't overwhelm them with theory. They followed the trail Michelle herself had unknowingly left behind. Hospital records showed her badge being used after she disappeared. Security footage confirmed it wasn't Michelle. Phone data placed two devices moving together, while messages from one claimed everything was fine. Forensic evidence tied Michelle directly to Giselle's vehicle. Each category of evidence reinforced the next. None contradicted it. In the courtroom, jurors watched Giselle move through the hospital on surveillance footage, using Michelle's badge, entering restricted areas, retracing familiar paths. These are not random movements. They mirrored Michelle's routine. Phone records told the same story. While texts from Michelle's phone claimed she was safe, Giselle's phone appeared in the same locations. Cafes, parking areas, roads leading away from the hospital. The devices traveled together until only one kept moving. Then came the forensic testimony. Experts explained how Michelle's blood inside Giselle's SUV ruled out coincidence or accidental transfer. Michelle had been inside that vehicle, injured, trapped. The courtroom fell silent as audio recordings were played. Scott Markin's voicemails, angry, possessive, threatening, were no longer dismissed as emotional outbursts. In hindsight, they sounded like warnings. The defense attempted to raise doubt. Timelines were questioned, interpretations challenged, but no alternate explanation accounted for every piece of evidence pointing in the same direction. When the jury returned, the verdict came quickly. Guilty. Michelle's family sat motionless as the word was spoken. Justice had been delivered, but nothing about the moment felt victorious. Giselle Esteban was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Every act meant to control, mislead, and delay the truth ultimately became the reason she was held fully accountable. Still, the case left questions behind. How long had Michelle been watched before anyone noticed? How many warning signs seemed harmless until it was too late? Michelle Lee was remembered not for her disappearance, but for the life she was building.